Thanks for dropping in. For the month of September, I challenged myself to learn digital sculpting. This is far outside my comfort zone of mechanical designs using rigid CAD software, so to hold my feet to the fire, I've created, printed, and released a model every single week. This growing collection of designs now includes a ghost, a mummy, and Frankenstein. This week's model was the most challenging and detailed design yet, a werewolf. So, let's get to it. Here we are in Nomad Sculpt for the iPad. In the background, I've added a sketch of the design I had in mind, although it's only a starting point. First, I'll rough out the head and body using the same basic technique I already demoed in the previous two videos. Every part of the model starts out as a sphere, which I scale, position, and stretch using the Gizmo tool. Then I use the Move tool to distort that sphere further into a basic shape, a snout, an eyebrow, a tooth, whatever. I'm going for a cute aesthetic, but I don't want the model to look too much like an inflated balloon. So, I use the Flatten tool to create sharper internal lines within these shapes. This is most noticeable in the nose and the muzzle. Some shapes work better as 2D sketches than in a 3D model. For the rough fur around the werewolf's neck, I decided to use 3 simplified tufts. These shapes become a design element that I reuse throughout the model to give him a more consistent look. When I started sketching this design, I knew it was going to be tricky to get him to match the other monsters in the series. Werewolves have distinctive legs that wouldn't look right with the stumpy proportions you see in Frankenstein or the Mummy. As a compromise, I chose a very hunched pose and scaled up the skull. The legs are still long, but they're so folded up that they don't look too out of place next to the others. After getting the overall leg dimensions down, I merged the pieces together and sculpted a few sharp planes in. For the tail, I used the Tube tool with a varied diameter. The tail touches the ground, so I could avoid having supports there. Unfortunately, there are a lot of parts to this model that I couldn't cheat so easily. Speaking of which, it's time for the arms. No, you aren't imagining things. These arms are not in the same position as the model you've already seen. I scrapped these arms and remodeled them later into an entirely different pose. This is the first model in the series with defined fingers. It only seems fair since the feet have prominent claws, but hands are a nightmare to print at small scales. So I stuck with the cartoon convention of only 3 short fingers and a thumb. You've already seen the printed model, so you know we're far from the werewolf's final form. At this point, he looks more like a rat than a wolf. Part of the issue is the huge head. It makes you think he's a small creature. But there's other little rat-like cues that I clear up over multiple revisions. The pouncing pose didn't help dispel that rat look, so I deleted those arms and used the Tube tool to recreate them in a more broad stanced position. Then I changed the shape of the forehead, moved up the ears, and shifted the eyes into a more predator-like forward-facing position. I also closed up the jaw, which means that those teeth can be printed without supports. Okay, back to the hand. In truth, this is the 4th attempt at sculpting this part. I cut out the other tries because they're basically the same process with just slightly different placement for the fingers. Each finger is the same stumpy block, which I clone, scale slightly, and reposition. Once I was happy with that, I added some claws to match the werewolf's feet. Last but not least, it's time to add the fur tufts. I chose to add 3 tufts at the elbow, wrist, knee, and ankle. For the neck, I really piled those on to blend the head with the body. And here's the first test print. It came out fairly well, but there's one major flaw. Our werewolf can't stand up. Luckily, the model wasn't too far off from working. I just chopped off the feet, rotated the werewolf to a more upright position, and then reattached the feet. If you compare the two versions of the model side by side, the change is pretty subtle. This is why I always recommend test prints before sharing models. In retrospect, it's pretty obvious that the first version wasn't going to stand up, but the print is what made that clear. While this model still requires quite a few supports, the upright stance reduces that. The only real problem areas are under the legs here, the claws, and under the chin. I'm still a novice when it comes to actually printing with supports. I just rarely make a design that requires them. But for this, I tried both traditional and organic tree supports, and I got decent results with both options. Alright, we have 1 week of Sculptember to go. I hope you check out that final video. But until then, happy printing, and thanks for stopping by. Hey, thanks for sticking around. Since you did, I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm planning something special for the final Sculptember video. I'm going to print giant 200% scale versions of all of the designs. I've already finished the ghost, and the werewolf is printing right now. These are pretty big prints, but I think it will be worth it in the end. I'll see you then.